Hello witches, it's Keldon. I hope you're all doing well. So tonight I want to talk a little bit more about the differences between traditional witchcraft and Wicca. This is the second most common question that I get. I think many times people are expecting there to be or wanting there to be a big dramatic difference between the two paths. However, I'm going to be honest and I'm going to say that this is not always the case. That is sort of a bold yet controversial statement. And I'm not saying that they're not different, but traditional witchcraft and Wicca are both forms of witchcraft. They are essentially two sides of the same coin. In fact, I often describe them as two tree trunks growing out of the same base. They share the same root system. They are pulling from a lot of the same source material. The difference then lies in how each path branches out. Traditional witchcraft tends to lean heavily into folk magic, as it is heavily influenced and inspired by folklore. Wicca tends to take a more ceremonial route. Now, before we go any further in this video, I want to point out that it is extremely difficult to definitively say what is true for all members of a community. Additionally, because traditional witchcraft and Wicca are two sides of the same coin, sometimes that line that separates them can get a little blurry, and overlap does occur. For example, you will find practitioners of traditional witchcraft who, whether they realize it or not, are incorporating elements of Wicca into their practice. You'll also find practitioners of Wicca who incorporate elements of traditional witchcraft into their workings. That's okay. So just know that as we go forward, so as I'm talking, if exceptions start popping up into your mind, this is why, and I encourage you to leave a comment below and we can sort of talk more about that. Okay, so the first difference that I thought of is that Wicca involves a god and a goddess, specifically a romantic sexual partnership who create a specific narrative regarding seasonal shifts and fertility of the land. Now, in traditional witchcraft, you may find practitioners who work with deity, sometimes specifically the witch father and witch mother, who I find sometimes get mistaken for just being another iteration of the Lord and Lady in Wicca. But I think that this is a gross oversimplification, because oftentimes the witch father and witch mother are operating autonomously of one another. They are not so much a romantic sexual union, so much as they are creator deities in their own right. The title father and mother does not refer to them as a parental couple, but as their own distinct primordial beings, right? Everything comes from them, not because they got together and through their sexual union created everything, but because they're creating things all on their own. So there's that. You'll also find practitioners who eschew the concept of deity work altogether and instead focus on other spirit types. So ancestors, spirits of the land, the fair folk, familiar spirits, fetch spirits. You'll find practitioners who work with one or some or all. It's really a mixed bag. So for example, I work with all of those different spirit types, but I know practitioners who only really focus on their ancestors or focus exclusively on the spirits of the land. So it's definitely very varied. The second big difference is the specific holy days. So in Wicca, we find the concept of the Wheel of Year, these 8 seasonal Sabbats. And in fact, it's these Sabbats that mirror the narrative of the god and goddess. In traditional witchcraft, you'll find holy days that are more intuitive, more land-based, so specifically rooted in one's own bioregion. You'll also find practitioners pulling in holy days from their own ancestral cultures, as well as practitioners who focus exclusively on a lunar calendar. When it comes to the rituals themselves, they are also pretty varied. The one I want to focus on is casting a circle. So in Wicca, at the start of ritual, there is the casting of the circle. And this essentially is when elementals, guardians, watchtowers, etc. are evoked to create a protective, sacred space within which magic is contained during the ritual, and then the god and goddess are invited in. In traditional witchcraft, we have the ritual of laying a compass. So I would say on the surface, these are both, casting the circle and laying the compass are part of this broader heritage of magical circles within magical traditions. But the compass is used really as a navigational tool for traveling into the other world. When we lay a compass, we are creating a liminal space and we are opening roadways into the various realms. So instead of inviting spirits in, we're sort of asking to be invited into their space. On the topic of rituals, and there's a very loud car going by, as so often there is, within Wicca, there is a specific set of ritual tools. So I'm thinking about the athame, chalice, wand, pentacle. In traditional witchcraft, there's really minimal use of tools. In fact, the only really common tool used is the stang, which is a fort ritual staff, traditionally used as an homage or an altar to the witch father, but it's also used to direct energy and as a vehicle of flight for the practice of hedge crossing. Outside of that, tools tend to really be utilitarian and practical. So things like knives for cutting and carving, bowls for offerings. The cauldron is another sort of symbolic tool, but again, it's also used very practically. So I use my cauldron to burn fire. That sounds funny, burn fire. To light a fire within when I am working outdoors. But again, tools aren't just operating symbolically, they're operating in a very utilitarian way as well. The final difference is the occasional use of specific moral codes within Wicca. And I say occasional because the Wiccan Rede and the Law of Three are not followed by all Wiccans. When we look at OG Wicca or traditional initiatory Wicca, those concepts are not always present. They haven't always been around. So I just want to put that out there. Now, obviously, there are many practitioners who follow the Wiccan Rede and it harm none, do as ye will, and the Law of Three. In traditional witchcraft, we don't have any sort of codified ethics. Instead, we focus on personal sovereignty. So it's ultimately up to the individual practitioner to determine what is right or wrong, or all of that gray space in between in any given situation. So those are just some of the differences that I thought of. You could maybe think of more, and if you do, I encourage you to leave them below. Additionally, if you think of similarities, places where there is overlap, I encourage you to leave that in comments below too. So often we focus on differences and we demonize similarities, and I think that's a shame because I think there's a lot of interesting things to explore. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, take care.